Welcome, Liz Kim, to How to Be an Awesome Writer's Assistant.
Hi.
Hi. So you and I went through the wars together as assistants in the Arrowverse world.
Yes, we are trauma bonded forever. You're never getting rid of me.
It really was because of the proximity, like we were all in the same building.
Yeah.
Because I was on Flash, you're on Arrow/Legends. So I guess to start, do you want to just like tell everybody what was your journey to eventually become a writer's assistant?
Oh my goodness. I went all the way around. So I do not recommend this. But then again, there's like not a lot of people, there's no one way to become a writer's assistant. I had after, so I had worked as a PA before I eventually went to, grad school at AFI. But right before I worked at AFI, I'd worked um, a job at Warner Brothers Tech Ops. So when I graduated from AFI and I went to that terrible like time of looking for a job and being in like impossible debt,
Right.
I eventually called that agency and was like, I need a temp job in entertainment in TV. I don't care where, anywhere. And they knew that I had a lot of like really strong assistant skills. So I was an assistant in the marketing department, and
Right.
I would write my little scripts. I was in the corner building because I was a temp assistant to the SVP. One day, one of them came by. I was working on a script. It was a hard copy. I was editing it like by
Yeah.
hand, and they just picked it up and then they left. And I was just like, "Don't take it."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I freaked out the next day. They came back. They had read it and they were like, "Is this what you want to do?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is what I want to do." And they're like, "You need to leave. You need to leave immediately." And I was like, she was like, "You can't stay here."
Okay.
Because like she was like, "We're trying to hire you. You shouldn't stay here. You need to go." So she got me the job as Will Plummer's assistant on Legends of Tomorrow. That got me the job as Mark Guggenheim's assistant on Legends of Tomorrow and Arrow. And
Wait,
um,
so you started as Phil's assistant and then you became Mark's assistant?
yeah.
Got it.
And then and on Arrow when we would be really behind, which was, all the time.
But it's
Um
also like those shows we were doing 20 something episodes a season.
23 episodes a season.
Like it's very hard to not fall behind when you're doing that many
That's
episodes.
ungentlemanly
Yeah.
because each episode would take like about 2.5 weeks total to
Yeah.
like break and write and everything. But there's more than there's not that many weeks in the year.
Right.
So it's like 2.5 weeks plus at least. And just like, I don't know, it's
Huh.
just so hard. Sometimes it would take like three, maybe four. I'm like really bad. Towards the end of this, like towards the middle of the season, everyone just gets so tired.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we would just have double rooms going on.
Hmm.
Um, and I would cover the other room. And when our writer's assistant got promoted, I stepped into that role.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
So
then were you a writer assistant on any other shows or just Arrow?
just Arrow. Yeah.
Just Arrow. So like to me, right, actually let's start here. Why don't you just tell people what a writer's assistant does in case anybody doesn't know?
So your big thing that you should be doing is taking the notes in the room.
Right.
So everybody's going to be sitting around like a large table. These references are kind of dated, so just kidding, I'm young. But like in Mad Men or like in, what other shows have this? Blackish. These shows are all off the air. I don't like how they all sit around a room and they just
Right.
talk all day. That's kind of what a writer's room is. And as they're talking, you're sitting there with like a laptop and you take notes and then you publish them at the end of the night and send them out to everybody.
Right. So to me, like I think a lot of people think that, or in a lot of people's opinion, script coordinator is the hardest of the assistant jobs. In
Yeah.
my opinion, writer's assistant is the hardest
They're both
because
hard.
they're both hard. Script coordinator, the stakes are higher.
Mistakes are
So I
it's
understand that, but like script coordinating is very to me procedural and like formulaic. Like if you once you get it down and if you have the discipline to follow all the steps, you can make it almost impossible to make like the big mistake that's going to get you fired. Like unless you publish something that gets shot, if you mess something up or if you miss a typo or whatever, like you can fix it in the pink pages. Writer's assistant, like you are in the moment and either you get the note or you don't. Like there's no second chance to do it right. You know what I mean?
Really, I think I find it to be the reverse. I felt like writer's assistant, you can always like it's usually okay because you know the room. Whereas like I don't know, I've never been like more panicked than I have been as a script coordinator when something's wrong and you have to recall something and it's just like really embarrassing because it went to the head of the studio and it went to the head of the network and all of your actors.
It is definitely nerve-wracking. And as soon as you publish a script to these like 400 or 500 people, however many it is, like the phone will always ring right after you publish it. Like that's just how, and it has nothing to do with the script, but you think it's you're like, there's the call that I just like ruined the show and I'm gonna get fired.
And it's always like the it's always like somebody who is like, I can't open this attachment. That's
Right.
what it always is.
Right. I guess it's just the way, I guess it depends how your brain works. Like my brain has just never, like I've never been fast. Like I don't process information quickly. Like even being in the room, you know how some people can come in the room and just like they can hear 40% of the break and they're just like, oh, I got it. Like I can't do that. I need to like really like read the board, immerse myself sort of in the break and think about it. So I
Yeah.
feel like being a writer's assistant, I also like I wasn't a slow typer, but I wasn't like a super fast typer.
Oh yeah, that's
Um,
gonna change
and
it.
I say all this because writer's assistant is the only job I've ever gotten fired from.
You got fired from being a writer's assistant?
I did. And that show, it was also on a half hour. I had never been on a half hour before. And I think being a writer's assistant half hour is a bigger deal because like the joke, like you gotta get all the jokes.
Got to get it down word for word for word. Yeah.
Right. And if you're not getting them, like it just that show, whatever. Um, so I
Did,
guess as a writer's assistant, what's that?
oh, did you have to type? Did they broadcast your notes on the board?
No, thank God.
'Cause,
Have you been on a show where they did that?
um, no, I haven't. We were on but I was definitely like I was definitely on a show where we were on Zoom and everyone could
Yeah.
see the notes as you were typing them. So sometimes
Right.
you would get, oh, but you didn't, you got to write this down. You have to write it down this way. Just like, I'll
Right.
get there.
Wait, so when you guys were on Zoom, the room notes, you were just like typing them in front of everybody?
Well, I was like at home.
Well, no, but I mean like they were because like the way
Yeah.
we would do it is we would have the boards like on the whatever it was, the Google sheet or whatever it was, like in like whoever was running the room or typing would be like the person writing on the board in essence. And
Nero.
then the writer's assistant though, like his notes were just like we couldn't we couldn't see what he was writing.
I only worked on one show that did that, where everyone
Yeah.
could see what the notes were. And like you could toggle in between documents and look at their, and I was only covering, but
That sounds
yeah.
horrifying. That sounds horrifying.
That's especially when you write like little notes to yourself and
Yeah,
everyone's looking at you can see the you can see the notes and you're like, oh my God.
right. That sounds like a nightmare. Uh,
I mean, it was fine. It's like I think I don't know. I felt like things were a lot less stressful when you're inside your house. Like, what can really hurt you inside your house?
Even like if it were my episode when we were on Zoom and I was like typing on the boards or whatever, I even hated that. Like just like having
Yeah.
people watch like what I was typing on the boards.
Uh, yeah. I mean, it is. There's an element of stress to that. I could see
Yeah.
that.
It didn't
But you
bother
know,
me to write on the board when we were physically in the room.
see, I find that more nerve wracking.
Although one
I don't
time Andrew like made fun of me because I like he was very tall and I couldn't reach the top of the board.
know.
And he was like, "You're wasting all this space." And I was like, "Well, like, do you want me to stand up? Do you want me to stand on like an apple box?"
Oh, man. Those were huge boards too. Like nobody could reach the top of that board.
Right. They were like super tall, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so as a writer's assistant, were there any like processes you like would you like actual processes you would use or is it just like opening up a Microsoft Word document and just typing what you're listening to?
Both.
Both?
Um, yeah. So I mean, basically you're typing it on a Microsoft Word document as you're going, but there are processes that I would recommend. The first is that you have to be very organized.
Hmm.
Ideally, you would save notes by episode, and then you would save notes by, like, you would save, like, have a standard naming format for all the notes. So, like, blank show dash room notes dash, like date in a specific
Uh,
form. Like today's November 22nd, like 11.22.24 or whatever you want to do.
right,
So you have it so you can always find it. The second thing that I would do is I would save notes in different folders by episode. So
right.
then, like we talked about, like episodes like 103, 105, and like 108 today, I would have folders that I would save the notes in, and I would save that document in 103, 105, and 107. You can also do it by character. I never did because it just got too crazy at that point. You're just saving something in every folder. The other thing that I would do is you're cleaning up the notes, um, highlight the things that you landed on.
Mm,
And then
that's smart.
another thing that you do is that sometimes, like, I would just, because you have to go quick.
Yeah.
So I would save italics for something that were notes for me to look
Uh,
at later. To like, but bold, I would bold that whenever the showrunner would come in and say, like, this is what I'm looking for, those notes would be in bold. So I could
yeah.
find them easily, everyone else can find them easily. And then the last thing is at the end, I would try to also, at the end of the day, I would try to group so I would keep a rough draft of like the raw notes. Like this is how what we had at the very end of the day because they're chronological, and save one that was like that same, like blank show, room notes, like 112224 dash raw.
Hmm.
So then you have a chronological copy before you
Yeah.
clean it up in case you mess stuff up, and or you
Right.
actually delete like 3 pages and you're like, oh my god, where are these notes? So you have a raw version that you've already saved, and then you can go and put it into, then you go and you try to organize things by um like by topic discussed. And then at the very, very top of it, you put down like the big points that we landed on that day. These are the things. So if someone's looking at the notes and they can only look at the first like half page or whatever and see like this is the important thing that happened. And then you have a bunch of notes afterwards. Sometimes when notes were really, really, really long, um, I would put in a table of contents
Yeah.
as well, just so like you can find stuff without having to flip through like 30 pages at a time. And then the last thing is there's one more thing.
Is it like the boards?
Yeah, so a lot of times I would like take pictures of the boards at the end of the
Uh-huh.
day and then just keep them in a separate folder so
Yeah.
that you're able to like, like say like reference them like because people will come up to you and be like, "Oh, that last Thursday after lunch, what did we talk about?" Or like, like Thursday, like 3 months ago. Do
Hmm.
you remember when we talked about that one thing 3 months ago? And the answer is like, honestly, like maybe some people can, but I couldn't recall that off the top of my head. Um, so I would have a copy of it and I would be able to look it up and find it for them. The other thing that I would do that I would recommend now is rather than Microsoft Word, I know Pages does this, and I would just put stuff in Google Docs.
Uh-huh.
We started doing that during the pandemic because everyone can access it. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
One, Google Docs will automatically save different versions of stuff. So you can always go backwards. So like say for example, like you were cleaning up the notes and like you couldn't find something or you accidentally deleted something, you can always just go backwards and like like, oh, actually what did the notes look like at 117, and you can just go
Yeah.
backwards, it'll automatically save for you and you can pull that up. The second thing is that it's really easy to copy stuff into folders, and so whenever someone comes up to you and like 3 months later, like 3 months ago we talked about that one character that one time, what's the end result of what did we actually say, and you can, instead of being like, okay, 3 months ago, like instead of going through like 40 different Word documents trying to figure out what they're talking about, you can actually just Google search that character's name and it'll show up all the documents where that character is ever mentioned. And then the last thing that happens is that I worked on a show where all the notes were just in a folder in our shared Google Drive document.
Mm,
So all the writers had access to the notes that way. Didn't have to, because they're not going to be able to find. They're not going to be able to like like a lot of times people come up to you and been like, "Hey, do you have the notes from like last Friday?" Which is why I recommend keeping a copy on your desktop. And then um, if you do it in Google Drive, I think that was very helpful during the pandemic, at least because we didn't actually go into an office. So like we could just look in our Google Drive like folder ourselves and look for the notes that Friday. If you're back in an office, I would recommend keeping a version like both on your desktop and on Google Drive at all times.
yeah, I think that's wise.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was very paranoid, and sometimes I would keep stuff, especially as a script coordinator. I was very, very paranoid, and I would keep stuff on Google Drive. I would keep stuff. I would keep a master copy
Hmm.
on my desktop that only I had access to, and had a lot of separate documents, a lot of
Right.
like secret documents that I just kept for myself, like in between docs. I also had a copy on Box in case Google Drive went down. So I think having as a writer's assistant, I would recommend for the notes at least, I would recommend like at least having it in two different places in case something happens to you, which is something that happened to me at one point where like something happened to my laptop and I didn't have like I had to like I think I needed a new hard drive or something. And so I just had to make sure that I had transferred all the documents before and they were all like on this USB key. And I just remember now thinking like that was real dumb. What if something had happened to my USB key?
No, but that's how you learn.
Yeah.
Um, that was a lot of stuff. I kind of wish somebody would have like taught me all that stuff before I was a writer's assistant and like
I
did not.
know. Like you only learn stuff after you mess up and you're like, oh my God, never doing that again.
I know, right? Um, so like, are there like everybody makes such a big deal about being like in the vaunted like writer's room. And like, oh, I don't know if you're ready to like be in the writer's room yet. And like it can be intimidating and there is like a hierarchy and all that stuff. Um, but being like a writer's assistant, I guess like what would be your advice as far as like, yeah, like you want to like you want to pitch. It is hard to pitch when you're also trying to like take everybody's notes.
Yeah.
But then as far as like you're still an assistant. Like you don't want to be shutting like you don't want to be telling writers like their pitch is bad, even though you know it's a bad pitch that like we're not gonna do. So I guess what would sort of be your advice there, or what are things that you would say like don't do this if you're a writer's assistant?
Huh. That's hard because like I would say the number one thing for most people is going to be talk less, but for some people it's going to be talk more.
Uh-huh.
So it's really hard to say. I think you have to be really good at room. You have to be really good at like just like reading. And I know you're typing and I know you're busy, but just like reading people's expressions or just like
Hmm.
especially if they're new, like getting to know like your co-EP who's running the room, your number two, get to know them and get to know what
Right.
they're like and get to know like, like being able to read, like, are they irritated? Are they happy? Are they like in a good mood? Are they in a bad mood? Like that's going to be very, very important. Are they the type of person that doesn't want to be interrupted? Or are they the type of person that's looking for like validation and wants to be interrupted? That's going to be really important. The other thing is, um, I would say like probably err on the side of caution, like talk a little less
Hmm.
until you really know them. So like at
Yeah.
least for the first couple of weeks or so, I would err on the side of caution, maybe talk a little bit less than you normally would,
Yeah.
see how it goes, see how it's like received and then talk more. Usually within the first week or so, if you're not talking enough, someone will put you aside, be like, hey, you can pitch, like and then certain, certain rooms are very, very, very into paying your dues, so they won't like it.
Hmm.
You just have to know what kind of people you're dealing with. But it's much better for someone to pull you aside and say, hey, you can pitch. Like, we want to hear your pitches versus someone pulling you aside and being like, hey, you're talking way too much. Don't do that. The second thing is, I would say, don't interrupt the flow. So things move very, very quickly. And a lot of times, especially when you're new, you're going to start having ideas that are 5 minutes or like 10 minutes behind like what we're talking about. And if
Yeah.
that happens, just keep a small notebook, like on the side of your laptop or just somewhere. Write it down. Or like maybe you have a separate Word document or just like, like in something. Just write it
Yeah.
down somewhere. It's not going to go away because we're probably going to come back to that topic at a certain
Right.
point. And if we don't come back to that topic, that means that that pitch was dead anyways. It wasn't a useful pitch. So
Right.
just keep, but don't interrupt someone's train of thought to be like, yeah, let's talk about like, when we're talking about like, character, like, like we're talking about character B to be like, hey, remember that thing from character A, like that we were talking about 10 minutes ago? Let's talk about this now. Like,
Right.
don't interrupt what everyone else is doing. Um, and then the other thing is just like, I mean, other than just like reading, I would say reading the room is the most important thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something that you said was making me think like if you're a writer's assistant and you really want to be like involved in the discussion, you want to pitch and all that stuff, like the beginning of the season is going to be difficult to do that because everybody's in the room, including the
Mhm.
showrunner.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of voices, a lot of upper level voices.
Mhm.
And like as the room starts to dwindle, because like after the first couple of weeks, especially if you're on a show where stuff is shooting, the
Right.
showrunner's not going to be in the room anymore. They don't have
Yep.
time.
They're not going to be there for when the pilot is shooting. They're not going to be there during prep for the pilot. At that point, like your number two is probably on script. So
So yeah,
if
the room will dwindle. People are gone. People are on script or on set or on whatever they're on or rewrites or whatever they're doing. So like you'll get to a point where it's the room is like we need as much input and as much help as we can get. So like pitch away writer's assistant
oh
or
yeah, you're going to have your moment.
yeah,
So it's better to be patient than it is to come in. Also, because like first impressions are really, really hard to overcome.
yes.
If you come in there as in you're the person that's interrupting the showrunner, you're going to have a really, really hard time.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's much better to like, for people to be like it's always about under promise, over deliver. It's always much better to like really surprise, be like, oh my goodness, like you have really good ideas. You should talk more. That's much better than be like, hey, you need to like talk a lot less and you're being disruptive.
Right. Um, and writer's assistant, one of the reasons that I think it's so hard is like it's so mentally exhausting because
Yes.
like when you're in the room for that many hours a day, everybody spaces out. Like it's just natural. And certainly as a writer on a staff, I've had these moments where it's like, the showrunner would be like, "What do you think about that, Josh?" And I'm like, "I haven't listened for the last like however many minutes." And I have to be like, "Oh, I don't know. It could go either ways." Good, good points on both sides. But like when you're a writer's assistant, like your mind can't wander. Like you have to be engaged the entire time. And it's so exhausting. Like I remember I'd come home and my wife would like want to talk to me. I'm like, honey, I can't even have a conversation right now. My brain is just like mush.
Mm.
So with that, like how do you obviously most writers assistants want to be writers, but it's the job that affords you no time to write during the day. Whereas
Yeah.
like showrunner assistant or certainly script writer, you have plenty of time to write during the day when you're at work. So like as writer assistant, do you just have to like find some energy when that exhausting day is over to be able to write your own stuff?
I never could.
It's so
I
hard.
I never could. I was just I mean it's really funny that you said that you just needed a moment because I would if I had somewhere to go or if I had somewhere to be, sometimes I would just sit in my car for 15 minutes just in the silence and just be like, this is it. This is the life. Because you're just so tired of like talking and being on and like just having conversations or even just like honestly like listening at the end of the day. You're just so tired of it. I'm not a great morning person. Like even now I'm trying to force myself to be a morning person. And I always found writing super, super late at night to be a lot easier than writing in the morning.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna do it, that's the only way to do it. But I also would say, like, I think when I was a writer's assistant, I felt a lot of pressure. Um, because to be writing like I'm gonna be writing like, 5 pilots a year by myself. And the answer is like you're not, especially when your season is really that long. You just have to be, I think now that I haven't been in that like, and I felt a lot of shame around it about like I'm
Mhm.
not writing that much. I'm not writing that much. So when we'd be on break, I would just sometimes I would just go off like a banshee, and
Yeah.
sometimes these things were terrible. Like I have so many like so many like because I was trying to go fast. I was trying to
Right.
just like write anything down, and I would come up with like 50 pages of something that was just like dribble. And instead, it's only the times that like I really, really thought about like the story, about what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to tell, that things
Right.
turned out good. And obviously, like I don't recommend that because that's a very long process. But that's when I started getting traction and moving, like having my pieces like work for me versus like just coming out like in between breaks and just being like, oh, I'm gonna write something really, really fast and just like have it done because
Yeah.
everybody else is writing like 6 pilots a year or 6 pilots a month and just like all the time. And it's just like
Yeah.
the answer is like looking back now, I'm like, nobody's writing all that much when they're like when they're in that room as a writer's assistant. You don't have the mental energy and you just are tired all the time. Most people are writing, during their like hiatuses and breaks and getting stuff done on weekends. They're not doing it on the same day. So I mean, some people, I've actually that's not true. Like I do know a couple people that were able to write like consistently when they were writer's assistant,
That's
but
so hard.
that was not me.
But I mean, like the trade-off, if you're an aspiring writer and you're thinking like, well, why would I be a writer's assistant if I don't have any time to write my own stuff? The trade-off is that you're theoretically in the best position to get staffed
Yeah.
because you're
And
the
then,
assistant who's in the room with the writers, basically like sort of participating as a staff writer.
yeah.
Um, and that's why like in these studios, that's why they justify paying the writers' assistants like nothing. Which like it's always been so
Uh,
infuriating to me because I'm like the fact that writers' assistants get paid so much less than script coordinators, not that anybody at the assistant level is making a lot of money, but like when I first found out what a writer's assistant was getting paid compared to a script coordinator, I was like, that's insane. Like no, not you can't argue that one of those jobs is any easier or harder or less important. Like they're to me of equal difficulty and equal importance. But they're like, well, you, the writer's assistant, you're the first one in line to get staff. So, well, yeah, like maybe, but not always.
Not always. I mean, like this is something that I mean, like you talked about when the room thins out.
Yeah.
When the room thins out and people will start getting tired.
Uh-huh.
And if you're pitching well, a lot of times, like, you're pitching well, your pitches are getting consistent on the board. Um, a lot of times, like, people are just exhausted and they're just like, hey, what about Josh? Or what about Liz
Right.
for a script? Because it's like, I think at Arrow, our traditional, like, assistant, the writer's assistant or the assistant script was always the Christmas script.
Uh,
The script that was written over Christmas break because nobody else wanted to do that. When you're the writer's assistant, like that's like the most exciting thing to happen in the face of the earth. Yes, going to be a time. I'm not saying that all shows like don't go to your boss and be like, hey, can I write the Christmas script? Like, don't do that. But
right.
um,
Yeah, like I
but
feel like on Flash, I was always on script, like especially when I was an assistant, I was always on script during Super Bowl. Like I
yeah,
would never be able to go watch the Super Bowl because I always like was on script because that's when they would give us freelances.
yeah, it's always there's always something that
Yeah.
nobody wants to write during that nobody like, especially if you have families, people with families or people have kids, like they don't want to be on script for something. A lot of
Hmm.
times it's the holidays or
Right.
even the holiday. Um, so that time will come. I would also say something that I didn't do. I was always kind of afraid to do this, but if you've been a writer's assistant before or a script coordinator before, when you're interviewing for a show, I would say it's okay to bring that up.
Yeah.
Like, don't be like, hey, will there be a script? Like, don't be like, hey, I demand a script. Don't do
Right.
that. Just be like, hey, like if the room, I don't know you guys very well, but if the room goes well, you know, is there an opportunity or is there an opportunity for like after the first year or so, after you guys know me?
I think opportunity is a good word. I think what might there be an opportunity for me to write something versus
Yeah.
saying like, yeah, like I demand a script.
The other thing that happens a lot with the writer's assistant, especially, um, is that there's a lot of group writing that happens. People get
Hmm.
behind, you have to turn drafts around like literally overnight.
Yeah.
Overnight, in 2 days, need an entirely new draft. And at
Yeah.
that point, it's literally all hands on deck. You just need people to churn out scenes as fast as possible. And you'll get included in that because you've already been in
Yeah.
the room. You know what's going on, you know what everyone's doing. And if your notes are good, if the beat sheet notes, especially, and the outline notes are solid,
Hmm.
then a lot of times they'll be like, hey, why don't you try your hand at writing like a couple of these scenes when they're handing them out? Another body is another body sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And especially if you're like, especially when people get tired or when the season's dragging, you know, especially then if you're able to turn things around well and quickly, I think that's going to be a huge boon for people to be like, well, why don't we give this person like, an act or like, a few scenes or maybe even that'll eventually become half a script.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like pitching and like sort of your value as a writer's assistant, or even when you're lower level like staff writer, I would say like any lower level writer below like producer level or whatever, you should always probably just do this. But like your real value is not like don't expect to come in with like a fully fleshed out pitch for like an entire episode or whatever. But like if you when the room gets like stuck on certain things that they can't figure out and it gets left with problems like we'll figure this out tomorrow or whatever, if you can come in with a few pitches to try to solve these problems, that'll go a long way because like your greatest asset is just giving ideas and sort of fodder to the upper levels who are very smart and have been doing this for a long time. Because chances are they're going to latch on to like something you say, something you pitch. It's not necessarily going to probably turn into what you envision, but they're going to be able to take that nugget and turn it into like something that they need to work.
Yeah.
And I think that that will go a long way.
Yes. I would also add to that, like, don't get precious about your pitches.
Yes.
Don't be like, oh, but that's not the way I pitched it. Don't do that. And then the other thing too is if you're gonna pitch, make sure that it doesn't have to be like a fully fleshed storyline. Make sure that it is a full pitch versus like, what about an idea about like berries? Like that's not helpful. But if you have something more specific, like a bear comes and eats these berries, and then when someone comes along, there's no berries left. It's just like something that's a little bit more fleshed out than that. I don't know. It's just that might be a little bit more helpful than coming in. And another thing too is like don't point out the things that aren't working and don't interrupt people to be like this isn't working because
Right.
that is also very not helpful. You should always try to think of like put yourself in like the number two or the showrunner's shoes. Like right now, what do we actually need and what would actually be helpful
Yeah.
instead of coming in with your own like it's really hard to put your ego aside because you're like, oh, I have all these like really brilliant ideas and I'm gonna tell everyone. But it's like sometimes like that's the most helpful thing isn't that. Or to be like, I have a better idea. Like if everybody moved on, it's sometimes like it's more helpful to put your ego aside and be like, oh, well, we're gonna do this instead and wait till they come back and they said, hey, this isn't working. Does anyone have any idea for this? Then you have that idea already ready to go.
Right. Well, you have to have, and I think that speaks to like, you have to have a fundamental understanding of what your job is when you're on a writing staff, whether you're an assistant or a writer.
Mhm.
Your job is not to make the show you want to make, it's to help your showrunner make the show they want to make.
Yes, I think
So,
that is
like, yeah.
such a good point.
And it's astonishing how many writers either don't understand that or don't care.
Yes, definitely. It's yeah, that's you hit the nail on the head. That is
Yeah.
almost insane, like how often that comes up.
Right. And it's also like, take a little bit of comfort in it, like in not being the showrunner and not being the one who has to make these decisions and not being the one who it's going to fall on if this stuff fails.
It's so stressful. And I think the other important thing is that, even if this isn't the ideal version of what you personally would like for the story to go, like I think there's going to come a time when that opportunity is yours and all that
Yes.
stress is going to be yours.
Yeah.
And the other thing to know is that there is a possibility that you may not have the full picture. This
Yeah.
happened to me a lot when I was like a showrunner's assistant. And we worked on a superhero show. And
Hmm.
sometimes I would just like hear stuff that I would hear stuff or I would see stuff in the notes that I was just like, I don't know if this makes sense, to be
Yeah.
completely honest. But
Right.
then the episode would come out and then the fans would go crazy because it was a nod to, blank, blank, blank issue from 1984. And I was just like, oh, that's what we're doing. You know what I mean? So that happened a few times. So it was just like, like even if it doesn't make necessarily, or it's like something that like DC Comics had specifically asked for, working towards like something in the crossover, sometimes you have to do stuff
Right.
that you don't have like the full picture. And sometimes you have to do stuff that like doesn't necessarily, make a lot of sense. Or maybe something like is like, like, or something that happens is that maybe the chemistry read with the actors isn't good. like we're working towards like this romance and now we're suddenly veering away from that and it doesn't make sense. Like, why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense, like story wise. Maybe
Right.
there's another reason why, or something to do with one of the actors, or something like maybe one of the actors isn't going to be there. So even though
Yeah.
it would be a better story with like this actor and this actor, maybe one of those actors isn't available that day. So yeah, a lot of things like that happen. And then you're rewriting for a different actor, even though that story is ostensibly not as good or doesn't make as much sense.
The crossover rooms, were you ever the one taking notes?
Once or twice, I think.
So like I feel like when you're taking notes just in a normal writer's room, there's obviously like a very distinct hierarchy in terms of like like obviously if a co-EP or the show or whatever, someone higher level is pitching, that's going to carry a little bit more weight than some. But like when you're in a crossover room and it's all showrunners,
Oh
is there
yeah.
anything that you would have like, I don't know, is there anything you can say about like how you
Don't
like you know what I'm asking?
don't mess that up.
Yeah.
Don't mess that up.
Right.
Like if you're ever in that crossover room where it's just a bunch of showrunners, these are the people that are going to have shows going forward. So
Yes.
do not mess that up. That was a very stressful. That I remember being like really, really stressed out about that.
Well, yeah, that would be that sounds again, that sounds terrifying to me.
There's also like sometimes like because the showrunners have been talking about this for a very, very long time, or they have thoughts
Hmm.
about it, or they're privy to stuff that you're not necessarily privy to. Sometimes
Yeah.
they'll speak to themselves in shorthand
Yeah.
and be like, it's like that idea that, yeah, like I think that's a great idea. And you're just like, oh my God,
Right.
what idea is that? I think maybe at um just use your judgment.
Hmm.
If these notes are just for them, like they know what they're talking about and they already remember. But if these notes are going to like maybe a wider group, maybe it might be prudent to be like, hey, I didn't get that. Just want to, or maybe just like this is what I use italics for. Just put stuff in italics. And sometimes you could just wait till there's a moment
Yeah.
where there's already a natural lull. And then you could be like, hey, back then when you were saying this, either pull them aside or if there's a lull, just be like, hey, what did you mean when you said this? I
Yeah.
didn't get the last part of that pitch. And if it's not important, it's not important. It doesn't need to go in the notes anyways. And if it
Right.
is important, they'll remember it. Or yeah, so but I wouldn't wait till like the very, very end of the day because
Mm.
they probably forgot by then. But just like use your best judgment there. And then if you don't hear something, or if you didn't get something, use your best judgment. Like sometimes it's okay to be like, hey, can you please repeat that right after
Yeah.
they pitch? But don't interrupt them when they're like on a roll or they
Right.
have a paired pitch. If someone's like, like if the co-EP comes in the day, like, to pitch to the showrunner and they have like something that they've been practicing or they practice like the pitch or like they're on a roll for something, don't interrupt them and ruin their
Right.
flow as they're pitching. To be
Right.
like, I didn't hear you or I didn't type that last part or my mind was wondering, can you please tell me?
You also can't become like a fan, but and I don't even mean like a fanboy. Like sometimes there's people in the room who are just like so good and so compelling that's
Yeah.
like you'll stop like I'm not saying you like that I would like stop and just be kind of like watching their performance and it was like dude you're supposed to be typing right now like
Like especially when they're doing that like pacing thing and then they would do all the parts. It's just like some
yeah.
people are just like there's a few who were just like naturally just like some of the best pictures you have ever heard.
Hmm.
It's like so compelling. You just want to sit there and be like, wow, like story time. You can't do that. There's also, I think like Greg was especially very, very, very good at this, where you could tell him like two beats of a pitch and he'd have figured out like where you're going with the rest of like he just knew because he would be someone who would be like, okay, we're probably gonna go like you said A, B, and then you're probably gonna end up at like, TUVYX. But instead, why don't we try like this other version?
Yeah.
And he'd be correct. But that is, I don't know. I never had the gall to be like, oh, God, I wasn't paying attention. Can you like say that again? But just like that's probably someone that like it'd be obviously like don't mess that up. And then also it might be really hard to like follow along. But just like definitely use your judgment and read the
Yeah.
room. Read the room is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Um, I think another advice I was given about being a staff writer, that
Hmm.
I think is very, very true to being a writer's assistant, is that you're there to be their cheerleader.
Hmm.
You're not there to like take down the number two. This
Yes.
isn't all about each situation. Like you're not there to be like, oh, that was a shitty pitch. Like, like no one
Right.
he's like, you're not there to do that.
I think that's good advice because like the easiest thing to do like when you're a lower level is to be the logic police
Yes.
and be like, especially as like if you were the writer's assistant and got staff, like the show better than most people. So it's easy to be like, oh, that doesn't work because of blah blah blah. But yeah,
Yeah.
like nobody wants the logic police. You're right. Like be the cheerleader.
I mean, it's just like most movies and TV shows don't make sense. No one's there to be like,
Right.
well, actually, like in physics, this is not like
Yeah, you're like, no one cares. Shut up.
we had a, but if it's something that is rather important,
Mhm.
um, maybe bring it up if it's like, like I think an example of something that would be important to bring up is like if you're the writer's assistant, um, and we're doing a storyline that we already have done on a different
Yeah.
show, on a different episode, that might be useful information to know. To be like, oh, but we already did this exact same thing with this exact same two characters, um, like three
Right.
seasons ago.
And I
I
think
think
it's all about how you phrase things. If you say like, just to let you know, and like if it doesn't bother you, like doesn't bother me. I just like, felt like you should know.
also I think the other thing too is like it's okay to admit that you don't know something. That's okay too. Like keep in mind that the people that are in that room who are running that room probably have been doing this for a lot longer than you have. And if you don't know, instead of trying to like pretend that you do or trying to like bullshit your way through it, it's okay to be like, I don't know, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah, as long
And
as yeah, especially if you're a PA or something, no one expects you to have the answers. But yeah, you always have to be like, I don't know, but I'll figure it out.
yeah,
Or I'll talk see who I have to talk to solve your problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can always figure something out. Or you can always go to someone to get
Yes.
some help and figure something out. And then the
Yes.
other one is just like you will get questions about, oh, do you have that in the notes? Or do you have the one time I would say, like, don't be like, I don't know. As you will get questions like, oh, what were the notes from before? Or like, what was that pitch that we were talking about? Like, how did that pitch end from earlier in the day? Or do you remember that pitch from like, like 3 months ago?
Yeah.
That's the instance that I would be like, don't say you don't know. Like, be able to find that. That is your job.
When I was a writer's assistant, we had this writer who like I feel like very clearly had some sort of substance abuse issue. And she would get mad because like we'd come in the next day to talk about things and like she would feel like her memory was that we landed on something
Yeah.
and we hadn't, and like she would get really mad at me. And I'm like, dude, you were probably like high in your shower and you came up with like this idea that you thought we landed on. And then like that never actually happened in reality. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. I guess I have no recourse to say that like if you think it happened, I have no recourse to say it didn't.
Oh, that's definitely happened to me before where someone's like, oh, remember that pitch that we did, like way back? There was that pitch and there was an entire, and I would like literally find the notes from that day.
Yeah.
And they were like, and there was an ending to that. And I was like, no, there wasn't an ending to this. We had moved on and we never finished that. But like they were so insistent. There was a fifth actor to that pitch. And I was like, but there, there wasn't. And it was like, especially when someone's insisting like very, very hard that, like, oh, but I did say it and there was an idea. And I was like, if you did say it, then what was it? Like
Well,
that
that's
is,
where your whole organization thing comes in. And like you can go all your smart stuff you do where you can go back to be like, this is when we talked about this pitch and we didn't land on this
because you're able
versus
to
just having a Microsoft Word document. And you're like, oh, I got to try to look through all these days of notes and see if I can find what they're talking about.
I'm trying to remember what I ended up doing. I think what I ended up doing was in that instance was I think I copy and pasted that specific part
Mhm.
into like the body of an email and then sent all the documents, relevant documents around it so then they can look themselves. Like every time we had talked about this. Um, and I think then it's really helpful to have like notes that have where we landed that day and then also like a table of contents of what we talked about. Because then they're able to look through it very quickly and see for themselves that like, like, oh, like there wasn't an ending. I think something that's kind of important about, I think we talked about this earlier very
Mhm.
slightly. Um, is like the writer's assistant is it is an important job, and I think a lot of people want that job.
Mm,
A lot of people want that job.
yep.
Um, so don't take it for granted. Try to do your best. And I'm just gonna say this: like, if you don't want to become a writer, maybe like if you have like everyone who has that job probably has an interest in becoming a writer. If you don't want to become a writer, I would recommend that you don't take that job.
I have
Uh,
no idea why you would want that job if you don't want to be a writer.
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
um, you can make a lot more money doing something else.
Almost anything else.
Like
You can make a
literally
lot
anything
more.
else. You can work at McDonald's and make more money, work less hours, and be less stressed. Try to keep an eye on like it's not necessarily about like who's taking like the best notes or like who's taking like, it's this is a relationship based business.
Mm,
And a lot of the value of being a writer's assistant is that you get a lot of FaceTime with the writers. So, like don't be a dick. Don't be don't be someone that they have to dread coming into work to see.
I think that that's wise. And yeah, in terms of FaceTime, it's like you're on the same schedule as them, so like you get to eat lunch with them. You guys all get to go for a walk together if you're physically in the room. You want like if you're a showrunner's assistant, you can't really leave your desk. If you're a script writer, you might be having to put out a script when everybody else is eating lunch or everybody else is like, yeah, you get to just like hang with these people all the time.
All the time. And you get an opportunity to impress them. So don't be annoying, don't be a dick, don't be an asshole because people will remember. And then when you get your shot, you should take it. Like, don't mess that up.
So like I guess when you were coming up, were you ever given any like general advice or anything that like super stuck with you or anything that you like preach like one of my big things is always it takes a lot of wrong answers to get to the right answer. Just like,
Yeah.
like um and I always tell like up and comers like it's never a job, it's always an audition.
Yes.
Like you really have to be, I don't have to explain that, but yeah.
Yeah. I have so many of these. Let's talk about like writing
Uh-huh.
for because like, obviously like why else are you taking this job where you're being paid?
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
the first is like in terms of scripts. One of the things that one of my professors at AFI said to us, and I think this is very true. He was talking about features, but I think this is also very, very true for TV. He said for features, like nothing is good till draft 11.
Hmm.
And the number one mistake that you see in like people who are up and coming is that the script is very, very underdeveloped.
Hmm.
And I would say like that's very true. And like a lot of like scripts that you're going to read are going to be incredibly underdeveloped.
Hmm.
So one of the showrunners at Arrow would also say a lot, like you have to go slow to go fast.
Hmm.
Sometimes and it's like, I think the pressure is like, oh my goodness, like I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna have the most samples ever. I'm gonna have like 12 samples, I'm gonna do 20 samples, 30 samples. But the reality is what you need like one or two really killer samples
Yeah.
because everybody has a good sample.
Yeah.
What you need is a killer sample.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing is when this is probably my biggest mess up is that when someone comes to you and say, "How I want to read your script," the showrunner especially, be ready.
Yes.
Be ready. Don't have like a half-written like like script that you're ashamed to show them. Like talking about that one killer script. Be
Right.
ready. Um, and then the other thing that really stuck with me, it's like honestly, that's the thing that I think about still. It like haunts me. If I
Right.
had been happy, like how different would my life have been? The other thing is something that like stuck with me was at Comic Con. This is when I first joined like that camp.
Mm.
Wendy Miracle was on a panel for like writing and TV, and someone asked her like like what are you looking for like in a like they were basically saying that like they want to apply to like the CW shows, but all their scripts that they have are a lot more adult in tone
Mm.
than the CW
Yeah.
is. What do they like? Should they still send it in, or
Yeah.
should they write something that's teen based that's not necessarily their voice? And Wendy said, like send it in. We are so tired of reading the same script.
Yeah.
I think when I was a showrunner's assistant, especially whenever it was staffing time, oh my God, those scripts are all the same, all the
Yeah.
same, 300 plus of the same script, like
Yeah.
very technically proficient, but they're all the same.
Yeah.
And she had said, like, she wants something that she said, send it in with a profanity. We want something that sticks out, something that's memorable. And I
Right.
think that's so true because, especially when you're the showrunner's assistant or even like, I was a writer's office intern.
Yeah.
Um, and you're just reading like 10, 20, 30, all the
Right.
same, almost plot wise, beat by beat by
Right.
beat. Um, and it gets a little bit boring.
Hmm.
You want to stick out from the crowd, but you also want to showcase your own voice. You want it
Yeah.
to be in the style of, but don't get so stuck on. And I say, like, for example, the CW shows were very like there was a certain formula to them. So don't get so stuck on like following that formula exactly that you drown out your own voice. But also, I think at the same time, you have to understand that the job of TV writing is to mimic a voice. So when you are given that shot to like write your own or like write a couple of scenes, don't go crazy being like, this is the time for me to showcase my voice and for you to write the most unique thing ever in the history of TV. Don't do that. Definitely don't do that.
Right.
You're there to write to a style. So be familiar with your showrunners like writing style and the kind of things that they write and the kind of things that they use. A lot of the showrunners will use specific phrases or have like
Right.
certain like, like not verbal ticks, but like verbal like signatures kind of,
Hmm.
or write action in a very specific kind of way and be able to be one like know what that is and be
Hmm.
familiar with it so you're able to do it you're able to replicate it yourself. And then I guess we kind of phase into like writing for the show.
Hmm.
One of my first mistakes that I did very very first time I was asked to write a couple for my very very first episode. Like this is they told me to write an action sequence that we've never done on the show, and that was a show that was already getting long in the tooth, and we had 2 or 3 big action sequences an episode at least.
Hmm.
So I racked my brain to think of what is a really interesting action sequence that we've like really, really cool fight scene that's never been done before. And I pitched a fight scene on a roller coaster.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I came back. I mean, it was like very, very in the beat sheet, it was like very loosely drafted. I
Right.
came back with this fight scene on a roller coaster. And the answer to that was absolutely not. Like, we can't produce this. When you get your like first shot, you're trying so hard to like impress people and to be like, oh yeah, me, I can do this. But don't take it too far. The because I've also seen on a different show, someone get their first shot and then have it taken away. So make sure you don't like there's a happy medium in between. But
Mm.
if you are going to err outside of those lines, err on the side of trying too hard versus like you didn't try hard enough and then you get that first episode and that first episode gets taken away from you.
Yeah, that's tough. But yes, any failure should never be the result of a lack of effort.
Yeah. Or yeah. But just be familiar with like the showrunner's work, familiar with like the tone of the show, be familiar with like what they're trying to do. Yeah, that's I think we didn't cover this. Do you mind if I there's a few other things that the writer's assistant will do.
Yeah,
Like
no, this is yeah, go.
there's a few other things like you have to turn in stuff for the WGA. You have to take attendance for the WGA. Um,
Like the weekly work list?
yeah, you have to do a weekly work list. Sometimes it's just
I always did that as the script coordinator.
oh yeah, different shows will have different things.
Yeah.
Like there's just like different responsibilities.
Hmm.
Make sure to check in with your if you're joining a show that's like already existed, check in with your predecessor.
Uh-huh.
You're probably in the room. So if you're nice to them, if you haven't maintained a good relationship with them, you always go to them for help. And if not, like check in with the other support staff. Like, like what are we doing? So like stuff doesn't fall through the cracks because that is very important. Just make sure that you are on the right page
Yeah.
for what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Or check in with the studio exec to see like, you know, if it's a brand new show, check in with the studio exec to make sure that they have everything that
Mm.
they're going to need from you because sometimes like every show is a little bit different, all the studios are a little bit different,
So my last sort of thing that I always ask people, and like if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, or we can just cut it out. Have you ever like majorly fucked something up? Like, and if so, how did you handle that?
No,
And
I'm
again, you don't.
perfect.
Okay.
No, I mean, of course I have. Yeah. Well, first of all, don't panic.
Yes.
Yes, don't panic because it's not going to be helpful for you to be like, hysterically crying.
Right.
Um, I would say figure out figure out like what needs to happen for it to be fixed.
Mhm.
And then if you need help, be honest about what happened. Don't try to hide things.
Yes.
Um, and if you don't know, like it's just a difference if you know that you fuck something up or you mess something up, and then if you don't know, like one of the things that I did that I messed up, like for example, I put out like the as the showrunner's assistant is usually the only one that's left during hiatus
Yeah.
when everyone else is gone, and that's when the first episode goes out for the season. So I was going off of an old distro list, and I thought I did everything because I was trying to figure it out. I was trying to figure out it was synchronized back then, or was it
Mhm.
it was Dax back then.
Dax, yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to figure it out as I was going. I did everything right except for the um the title of the email, and the title of the email was off. Yeah, so the title of the email said from Dax, blah 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 blah, and it didn't have like like show episode 201. So like our one of the execs on the studio side didn't read it. She didn't know that they had gotten it, and I didn't know that until right before the notes call, where
Oh
she was
no. Yeah, because you do like if you're wired up on Dax or whatever, you do get a lot of emails from Dax. So like
yeah.
it is easy to ignore stuff because you just think it's dailies or you think it's whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she didn't read it until like 5 seconds into a nose call when she was like, but we never received the script. I was like, oh my God. Because it also, I think the other thing too is it was my first time sending anything out on Dax.
Hmm.
And I think I was panicking a little bit too much.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
because I was like, because there's no one to call. I'm like, like the script coordinator is
Right.
like out of the country. So who am I going to call? I think that was my biggest mistake. What I should have done is I should have slowed down, not panicked, and called someone for help.
Hmm.
Um, like I should have just been going through my Rolodex. I should have been like that, because I'd never done anything like that before. That was my very, very first time publishing a script. So yeah, so that was, but like don't try to hide it. Just apologize. Try to move on. Also, don't make it. Don't 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 go on and on and on about it
Hmm.
in a way that it becomes like the showrunner's job to like make you feel better. Um, but yeah, just own up to it and move on and try to learn from the experience. And then the other thing too that I would recommend is that when I was a script coordinator, to make sure that shit didn't happen,
Hmm.
is I wrote a run book for someone to fill in. So it was literally like a step by step. Yeah, it was like a 20 book with like screenshots and just like this is what you do, this is the list, this is where the list is. So then whoever is covering for you
Hmm.
at least at least has some idea of what's going on, or
Right.
like flying in blind trying to be like, I will figure this out. um yeah, I think so try to learn from it, try to like not replicate that experience. Another one, I mean, like, yeah, of course I messed up. There was this one time that my computer crashed.
Uh-huh.
Lost the notes halfway through.
Oh no.
They weren't saved anywhere.
Oh geez.
Yeah, that was a bad day. So just I just recreated them from memory as much as I
Uh-huh.
possibly could. It was just a section. Yeah, but that was a really bad day.
Yeah,
Um,
that's bad.
yeah. So in that case, I would say like that's why I started putting things into Google Drive, and that's why I would suggest like maybe having a copy of the raw notes.
Yeah.
That's why I started saving stuff as raw. because then at least if something happens, something catastrophic happens where you lose like your computer literally crashes halfway into like you cleaning up the notes instead
Yeah.
of like having to replicate like the last like 2 hours by memory. You
Yeah.
have a copy somewhere that's
Right.
already saved. Um, and then the like, yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, there's yeah, the one that haunts me was like I wasn't ready when the showrunner asked me for I want to read your script, and I had like a script that I was just not proud of, and I just didn't show her, and that was really stupid. I think
Yeah.
about that all the time. I was just like, you know what? Like, it was one, it was really stupid for me not to have a script I'm proud of, and two, it was really stupid for me not to show her anyways. It wasn't
Right.
like the best script ever written, but I think I just got so in my head that like this script had to be like the next coming of Aaron Sorkin, or I show her anything. It was just real dumb. That's something I think about all the time.
Right. Because they're not, yeah, like if you're asking your assistant for a script, you're not thinking it's going to be the West Wing. Like you kind of just want to see that that person like knows how to write.
Or maybe they're good at like a certain thing, or maybe they're not good at a
Right.
certain.
But yeah, everybody I asked this question about like, have you ever fucked something up and how'd you handle that? Every single person says like, don't try to hide it, just like take accountability, like own up to what you did and
Yeah,
then try to fix it that way. Because it's the little kid thing. Like if you try to lie about it and then they found out you lied about it, it's gonna be way worse.
it would be way, way worse. And then not only that, you have to remember that a lot of people in that room did this exact job.
Yes.
So they know.
Right.
They'll know. But at the end of the day, just like remember that it's a TV show.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Right. We're not curing cancer here.
right. It seems like the world is going to end. It feels like
Yes.
the world is going to end. Sometimes people react like the world is going to end.
Right.
But realistically, the world's not going to end.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Maybe on the show, but not in real life.
Well, I feel like we covered a lot of ground. Do you feel like you have anything else that you want to like tell these young hopefuls?
Go do something else.
We're, we're not supposed to tell them that, Liz. That's the secret. Yeah.
It's not too late to go to law school. No, I'm kidding. Like when it's great, it's the best job in the world.
Yeah.
It's when it's hard, it's hard. It's
Right.
really hard. But when it's you get paid to make stuff up and someone
Yes.
you like you make something up at like 3 in the morning. You write it down on a little piece of paper and someone will go build that thing that you made up for
Right.
you.
Right.
And then, it's amazing. And then you can watch it. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Like what other job can you literally manifest like an entire city?
That's such a cool way to explain. I've never really even thought about or heard it described that way. That's such a cool way to explain it.
You know what? I can't take credit for that. That's Oba Muhammad's.
Well, she's a smart lady.
She's a very smart lady. She said that to me, and I was just like, man, that is correct. I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, it's true. Like it's just like something like
It's funny, like you and I started talking 2.5 hours ago, and we started talking long before we ever pressed record. And like the lighting in both of our places has changed because you're on the East
so
Coast.
dramatically.
You're on the East Coast, and it's become nighttime since we started talking.
It's legitimately night.
It's
Um,
nighttime, and like I have this like sun on my face that like I did not have before.
we both looked much better before. Just kidding. We both look good.
I don't have like a way that I end these things. I just
I don't know why I was waiting. Like there's gonna be like closing credit music.
like we're in a pitch, and I'm like, and that's the pilot. I know I should add like in credit music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like a little da 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 da
All right. I'm gonna turn the recording off.
da.